Welcome to Seattle Voices. I'm Eric Liu. I'm delighted not only to hear our brand new theme music, but also to have as my guest today Lynn Shelton, Director of Film and Television Extraordinaire. Welcome, Lynn.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks for having me.
I want to talk about a bunch of the projects that you have going, but I want to just zoom out a little bit because a lot of our viewers have a general sense from popular culture of what a director does, whether of movies or TV, but not particularly a specific sense, right? Like, what is actually the life of a director like? And so, just even as we sit here right now, like looking back the last couple of weeks, looking forward the next couple of weeks, what's the rhythm? What is a director's life? How does it flow?
Well, one of the things I love about being a director is that it's never, week to week, your life is never the same. Because there are so many stages of a production and any kind of project, whether it's television, a television episode or a television pilot or a feature film. And then, of course, there's all other kinds of media that I haven't done or, not like feature documentaries, So somebody who directs a documentary is going to have a very different looking life than, some stuff that I do. But you've got this development phase in general for a project, which could mean years of writing a script, rewriting a script, and then once the script is in shape, you're looking for financing and you're looking, or a home at a studio, depending on the size of the thing. You might be trying to cast it and maybe get some key names. If it's an independent project, you might be trying to get some actors that might help you get financing, so that might come before the financing. So that can be something that could happen quickly, but usually it takes a while. And so a lot of times directors, such as myself, I have right now 3 things in development at various stages. And so, you're kind of, I'm equally devoted to all 3 of them, but I'm not exactly sure which one is going to, hit first, which one will actually come up to the plate. But it's good to have a few things kind of, on the stove burning away, simmering at various pace, at their own pace, so that you can have something that's going to be coming up, and some things they fizzle away and they don't work out, so you kind of, it's good to have a few things up. And then once something does get greenlit, meaning, you've got the financing in place and you've got your actors and everything's ready to go, then you enter the pre-production stage. And that is anywhere from, I've had projects where we only had a couple of weeks to pre-produce, but more often than not, it's at least a few weeks, 3, 4, 6 weeks, sometimes more, depending on how complicated it is.
What's happening in pre-production?
Pre-production, you're crewing up, so you're hiring every single member of the crew, all of the members of the cast and extras. There may be a lot of day players, like, for instance, my latest film, Laggies, one of the things that was fun about it was that I had a lot of cast and supporting cast coming in from out of state, but, from New York and LA. But I also had a lot of work for local actors, where they might come in.
You were filming this here in Seattle.
It was all filmed in Seattle. So I was able to actually, the whole crew was, except for very rare exceptions, the entire crew was local, all Washington State based, and a good half of the cast or something. It was like a lot of smaller parts, but still some pretty nice, breakout parts, So you're doing all of that, and then you're planning. So the assistant director is boarding up a schedule. They call it boarding, and what happens is she's looking at all the different schedules, trying to fly in an actor and consolidate all of their scenes within a few days or a couple weeks, or so that they're not waiting around in between, or you have to fly them away and fly them back again. So she has to take that into consideration, not to mention the locations, all the different locations that there are and what their availability is. They might be really expensive. If it's a restaurant, you might be able to not access them at all on a Friday night, or they'll be 10 times the cost. And then, of course, working within the budget. So it's a very complicated process to get the whole thing, scheduled out.
And during this period, actors are learning their lines and learning everything.
Yep. And as the director, I'm having meetings with them, either on the phone if they live in a different city, or in person. And I'm somebody who is not particularly. I love rehearsal time, but I don't use it in the way of like, okay, let's figure out how we're going to play this scene. It's more getting to know each other, establishing trust, talking about backstory and who are these characters, and what are their relationships with other characters and that kind of thing, so that when you get on set, they really have an understanding of who they are and what's what's going on in the scene.
Okay, so you're on set now, and let's start actually with the example of a film that, say, you've written, right?
Yeah.
Because that's been the case with your films, compared to, say, a television show where someone else has written and you're directing an episode or a pilot. Okay, we'll come to that in a bit. But your film, so you've gotten to the stage, and now people are on set, right? And you've written it. How much changes at that point? Or let me put it, or is it like what doesn't change at that point? Right?
Well, I've made several films with a very unusual. It sort of depends on the project. So I made 3 films in a row. My second, third, and fourth features, My Effortless Brilliance, Hump Day, and Your Sister Sister, were largely improvised. The dialogue was largely improvised. And that's a very different looking process of development and pre-production than a scripted show, because they don't have lines to memorize. It really is about all about a heavy collaboration with the actors and I'm inviting them to actually help develop their characters and their backstories. So it really fits them like a glove, because improvisation is sort of dependent. I find good improvisation is really dependent on how well you know your character and your relationship with the other people.
How much of a frame do you provide when there's that much improvisation?
Well, with My Effortless Brilliance and Hump Day, it was just an outline. It was like a list of things that should scenes and what should happen in each scene, just in terms of the emotional dynamics. Also, if there's any exposition that needs to be somehow organically, represented. With Your Sister Sister, I changed it up a little bit, and I actually wrote 80 pages of dialogue straight up. It looked like a script, but the idea was that we would toss the dialogue out on its ear if it wasn't working, or they could embellish this. They could use the words if they wanted to, but they could sort of make them their own, or change them around a little bit, or change the order in which they talked. So the idea is to keep it fresh, so that there is genuine reaction. Because you don't know what the other person's going to say to you, and so you're genuinely reacting, and there can be moments of surprise, and just it can really be a delightful way to work. It's also very stressful because if you have the lines on a page, you're going to be able to get that material and put it together later, in the edit room. But so it is stressful. So I actually like going back and forth between the two,
between
improvisation-based work and script-based work.
Right.
And my fifth feature, Touchy Feely, I wrote as well, and we really stuck to the script more often than not. There were probably 25% of it is ad-libbed or improvised, but compared to the previous ones, which had been either completely improvised dialogue or 20% written lines, it was the opposite ratio. And then Laggies was actually my first project written by somebody else, and really no improvisation at all, really.
Although part of the conversation that I know that you had with the woman who wrote the screenplay was when you came on board, that you had a certain vision of how things were going to unfold, and you and she had to develop a certain trust that she would, kind of let go, right, and let you craft a scene maybe in a way that that was a vision that you had, but perhaps not even what she had intended.
Yeah, well, the thing about movies is that they are the director is king, right? It's the director's baby ultimately. So that's different than in television. In television, it's the writer. The writer is king, and so when I'm working in television, I'm fulfilling. It's really collaborative, and I'm part of the team, and I'm fulfilling somebody else's vision, the writer-producer's vision. And that was really the only experience I'd had working with other people's scripts was in television, and so I would find myself sort of asking for permission to change a scene or to cut a scene or whatever I needed to do in Laggies with this film. And Andrea Siegel, the writer, had to remind me,
you're king.
It's it's your baby. You can make this movie, and I'm entrusting you. When I asked you to attach as director, I knew I wanted you to make the movie. So it was really helpful for her to give me that permission and remind me and sort of give me her blessing.
So at this point, having done both the scripted and the completely non-scripted and worked in these different mediums, do you feel like there's a sweet spot that is Lynn Shelton, left yourself, you really would like to be doing this kind of work with these kinds of parameters, or not?
No, it really has been. I sort of thought for a while there was this holy grail that was that sweet spot, and I've really come to realize that it's a project by project, scene by scene kind of question. It's whatever works best. And it's also the actors. You know, some actors, some of my favorite actors on earth are not good improvisers. And that is fine. There's no shame in that. They're actors, they're not writers, you know, and so maybe they can't sort of ad-lib and come up with their own words. They need the text as the spine of their performance, and that's totally fine. So those actors are the same ones who can take the written word that somebody else has written and just make it their own and make it seem completely naturalistic. For me, it's all about creating people on the screen who seem like flesh and blood human beings, as opposed to like sort of cardboard cutouts of what a human, you know, Hollywood thinks a human should be, you know. So yeah, whatever works to get me there, I'm happy to do.
That naturalism that you're describing is, I mean, if there's a through line, I mean, that's a signature of the work that you've created. But I'm curious for you, I mean, just as you have learned these various aspects of craft, I mean, so much of it in this world is learning by doing.
Yes.
But is there a chunk where you have been learning by watching others, and whether that's in this industry or maybe in, you know, completely separate industries? When you were describing earlier just the pre-production phases and the rest, really what was going through my mind was you're running a business. I mean, you're an entrepreneur in a sense, right? And you're whipping a team together and you're trying to hold a vision and you're delegating or not delegating, you know, well. And where do you find models for how to do different parts of what you do?
Well, I don't know if I've actually, you know, I haven't really directly learned from other people, but I'm always fascinated to find that crossover that you're talking about. I spent an evening recently with a bunch of folks, a lot of women who work in other industries, especially the tech industry, but people who manage, you know, manage teams. And they talked about how inspiring it was to hear me speak. And it made me realize that there's so much overlap. You know, it really is. You are this manager, you are this sort of, and a facilitator and a mediator. And that film is all about collaboration. I mean, there's no possible way you can make, I mean, I suppose somebody could, but it would be very difficult to be a one-man or one-woman band and actually do everything that's required to make a feature film. Really, it's a group effort. And I have a lot of musician friends. And it's really fascinating to talk about what it's like to create, you know, like comparing making an album with making a feature film, or even just collaborating with your bandmates. You know, how do you sort of rally everybody, value and respect each of their contributions, and yet make it a cohesive whole? You know, turn it into something that is greater than the sum of its parts, but that all fits together. You know, and so you to be a collaborator, it's really a challenge. It's really difficult because you have to find the right mix of people with a good chemistry, and people who are going to bring the best out in each other, and all work in tandem and kind of have the same focus and passion for making, you know, something great.
Do you feel like you're operating in a way that you've always operated, and now you're just, you know, getting to operate on larger and wider platforms, or do you feel like actually over the arc of your career, how you do stuff or how you are as a person has changed dramatically?
Well, the big shift for me came with, after years, decades even, of being a solo artist. Although actually I started in the theater, and that was what feature film reminded me of when I came to it much later on.
As an actor?
As an actor, I started in the theater. So I got a BA from the School of Drama at the University of Washington, and I moved to New York to do theater. And then theater and I had a falling out when once I tried to make a living at it, was like kind of over it. And then I went into, then I shifted my attention to photography, did that for a few years, got into grad school in photography at the School of Visual Arts. And then for years after that, I was doing everything, including experimental filmmaking. My first entree into filmmaking was as a solo artist, and I was doing everything by myself. And it was great. It was a great way to retain control, not have to worry about relationships yet, as I was just, you know, discovering my own aesthetic tastes, you know, in terms of visual beauty and how, you know, just the aesthetics of it. And then I was editing, and so I started getting hired as an editor on other people's feature films and short films, and I learned a little bit about collaboration because you're working very closely with the director as the editor. And so I learned about that there. But when I directed my first feature film, it was a huge transformation for me. Changed me as a person, it changed me as an artist. It was just like that aha moment, like this is what I was always meant to do with my life. But I don't know if I could have done it before. This was my late 30s, and it was interesting to me that I don't think I could have done this in my 20s. You know, I really needed the maturity and all the life experience. But the reason it was such a thunderbolt for me was that it became all about relationship. I knew I was never going to make a piece of art alone again, that it was always going to be in collaboration.
And that value
others.
far trumped the value of control.
Absolutely, and I'm a total control freak, so it was terrifying.
So that's saying something.
Yeah, but it was liberating. It was so liberating to actually be able to share my vision, communicate with others, and then see what they brought to it. And it was just way more than I ever could have, thought of on my own. And I started to see the power of collaboration, and of being able to let go of ego and not have to take credit for every little thing, but to share and spread around, spread the wealth, because you're going to create something greater than the sum of its parts. You really will, So since that major point was a huge shift for me, but then since then, I feel like, that was 2005 when I made my first feature. It premiered in 2006, and now it's 2014, and I feel like I've evolved immeasurably, just because, as you said, doing is learning, and I've just done. I've directed 6 features. I've directed a big major web series for MTV. I've directed a bunch of episodic TV and 2 pilots. So every single time you get on set or go through the entire process of pre-production, production, and post, you always learn so much. So I feel like I've just continued to be in school, and I feel like I'm a much better director now than I was at the beginning.
I want to rewind a little bit actually to actually being in school. When you grew up here in Seattle, and at what point in life did you decide that art was what you wanted to be part of?
Really early.
And then you got to theater in particular, right? But
yeah. But very, very early on, I knew I wanted to be an artist. My uncle is Peter Shelton. He actually has a sculpture at he has 2 sculptures here. He lives in Los Angeles, but he has a sculpture outside of the football stadium, Rock Shadow. And he has another one, Clouds and Clunkers, I think it's called, at the airport. In Terminal A, that I actually have
Delta Terminal.
in Laggies.
Yes, actually, now that you mention it, I realize they're the same style of work. I'd never connected those dots.
Exactly. And when I found out we were going to be able to shoot at that particular terminal, I said, okay, you guys, we've got to add a shot to the shot list. I have to get my uncle's sculpture in there. But he's a sculptor. My other uncle is a poet, and I have an aunt who is a singer and a theater artist, and so. My mom was a psychologist. My dad was a lawyer, and I felt like this weird artistic black sheep, except for these uncles and my aunt. And so I sort of identified with them very strongly when I was young, and they were kind of my personal role models, because I knew it was possible, to be artistic and have an artistic life. And I started writing poetry. That was actually my first art form, although I also loved visual art as well. So I was always painting and drawing, and then I discovered photography as well. Started taking classes at the Poncho Theater, which is now the Seattle Children's Theater, when I was like 11, I think. How to Be a Clown, I think, was my first class, but then I started very quickly taking all these acting classes. And so I started that search for what's my form, what's going to be my medium, or media, very early on.
And having these aunts and uncles as role models, was it simply that they were examples to behold, or did you actually discuss with them?
None of them lived in Seattle, and so when I would see them, I would talk to them about it. But really, it was more like from afar a little bit, just knowing that it was possible. And I loved all of their work too, which was really helpful to me, and inspiring. So I knew very early on, and then it was a matter of, I felt like, in retrospect, it looked like this sort of long, circuitous journey. I mean, one of the strangest points for me was when I really narrowed in on, sort of homed in on acting by the time I got to college. And it was like an addiction. Like I just always had to be in a show or know there was a show coming up. And so several times a year I would be, and I was really lucky at the University of Washington. I got cast in a lot of great productions. And then I kept doing it for a few years in New York. But when I started to shift my attention from that to photography, it felt like such a bizarre hairpin turn, and like I was letting go, abandoning this discipline that I put so much effort and work into. And I sort of thought, how fickle am I? Like, what does this mean? And it wasn't until I started making features that it all was like clicked, you know, oh, okay, you need those. You need both of those. You need your visual sense and you need your ability to, you know, empathize with actors and be able to communicate with them and know what that's like. So it was really funny how it only, but I just had to go with my gut, you know.
But there's a word you just used too that's crucial, which is discipline, right? You had mastered a form, both in the sense of an academic discipline, but in the sense of it took a ton of discipline to get as steeped in theater as you'd gotten, and that those were habits that now, whatever form or medium you might be playing in, keep getting
that's true too.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the alumni from the School of Drama at the University of Washington, and it's fascinating to see where everybody has ended up, and you know that it's helped them in all. You know, that discipline helped them wherever they ended up going. You know, and very few of them are still actors. You know, but they might. I mean, there's just a huge array of things that they're doing.
When you dig up your old poetry from being 11 or your early photographs or things, do you find any kind of connective line between the aesthetic of then and an aesthetic of now?
Yeah, I do. It's funny. I mean, you know, when in high school, I was very shy, and I was at Garfield High School, and I used photography was a huge, writing and photography both actually, because the drama I did was outside of school. So I did that at other, you know, places, the Seattle Children's Theater, you know, precursor. But in school, I feel like I was able to connect to other humans via this telephoto lens that I had. And I would take these portraits from across, you know, the gym or classrooms, and people had no idea. It was almost like I was a spy. But in those portraits, I was able to, you know, feel I'm looking through the lens safely. I'm on the other side of the camera, and I'm able to sort of connect to these people and try to give the viewer a glimpse into their inner life. You know, I'm looking for moments of vulnerability on their faces, you know. So, yeah, it's funny. I was just recently looking at that early work and remembering, you know, what was going on for me and what was my interest, because that's what I'm interested in is ultimately that question of who am I, right? And so that's what I'm interested in. All of the characters that I play with on the screen, all the stories have to do with that, with playing with identity and looking for your identity or having identity crises, you know.
So your life now requires you to be quite not shy.
Yes.
How, as a matter of identity, do you feel like you've just essentially developed muscles of extroversion and muscles of kind of, you know, all that?
It's true. I really have. I remember the very first film festival I went to with my first feature film was the Slamdance Film Festival, and they had this great mixer every day. It's a smaller festival. There were only 10 or 11 films in competition, and I won the grand jury prize, which was really wonderful for me. And it's a very homey, kind of cozy festival. You hang out with the other filmmakers a lot, and the programmers a lot. And every day at like 4 o'clock, there would be these mixers. And I remember that was when I learned about networking and about actually, because everybody knew that they were there to meet as many people as they could. So you would go up and talk, you know, this is my film, what's your film, where are you from, la la la, and then after 5 minutes or so, you'd say, okay, well, I'm gonna go meet some other people, okay, bye, you know. And it was like, I'd never been so comfortable in an atmosphere like that. And I used to think that, oh, schmoozing is necessary for this industry, and that just sounded so gross. And, but then after that experience, I realized, oh, it's just about connecting with other people, and you know, there's nothing gross about it. It's really lovely. So yeah, networking slowly started becoming less of a, you know, and also just becoming more comfortable in my own skin, which took me years to get, you know, to a place of. And so if there's something awkward, there's an awkward moment, which there always is. I mean, being human is being awkward, or making a gaffe, or you know, making a mistake.
That's where some of the best material comes from.
Well, I guess that means I'm not a robot, you know, and that this person isn't either, you know, and so just becoming more relaxed about those you know, what's going to happen if I meet this person? I'm just a lot less worried
this comfort
about
in your own skin, you know, part of what is, I mean, we've talked about some of your films, Hump Day and Your Sister's Sister and Laggies now, the most recent one, which as we sit here in September 2014, will be coming out in a month or so, right?
Yeah, October 24th. Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's very compelling about the arc that you're describing is just that you didn't even come fully into this life as a film director till what might seem to some people relatively late, right? You were saying your late 30s, right?
Oh, yeah. And for independent film in particular, I found that I would go to these festivals and all of my peers were usually men, usually white, and they were usually often under 25. I mean, young men. And I remember I had a kind of gobsmacked moment when in 2003, I think it was, I think it was 2003, Claire Denis came to Seattle. She's a film director who's French, and she, as I found out, she had made it up to that point, I think 6 or 8 films, all of them beautiful, highly regarded, Cannes films. And I found out in this onstage talk that she was doing that she didn't make her first feature till she was 40. And she had spent 20 years, she started as an assistant director to Francois Truffaut at the age of 20, and had continued to work on the crews of other people's movies, but didn't actually write and direct her first feature till 40. And I remember thinking, oh my God, okay, I have, it was like 3 years left or something, 4 years left, and I can do this, I can still have a career, because she was a woman, and B, she didn't start till later, and so I remember it being I was thrumming. I was so excited to realize it wasn't too late for me, and so I'm a big proponent of late bloomers. There was a woman whose name I'm completely forgetting, it's so embarrassing, but a couple of years ago I was at Sundance, and there was a woman who had written and directed her first feature at 63. And it was just like, yes, go girl, it's awesome.
Well, it's fantastic. Well, one of the things that I wish we had another half hour to talk, but it's going to be very interesting just to see how over the course of the next couple of decades your work evolves, Lynn.
I'm curious as well, Eric.
Yeah, well, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
My guest today has been the award-winning filmmaker and television director, Lynn Shelton. You've been watching Seattle Voices. I'm Eric Liu. Thanks for joining us, and tune in again.